Hey, I'm Pastor Murphy. Welcome back to Help Along the Way. In this series, we're talking about watching our consumption. We've been exploring something that might seem small at first, but is actually very powerful, the habits of our daily lives. What we eat, what we watch, what we spend, what we allow into our minds. Today, we return to the story of Daniel in the book of Daniel, living in the ancient city of Babylon under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II. Daniel and his friends had proposed a simple test, just 10 days, vegetables and water instead of the king's rich food and wine. Now that might sound like a modest experiment, but what happens next reveals something remarkable about the influence of a disciplined life. The results that no one expected. After 10 days, the steward examined Daniel and his friends. The Bible tells us something surprising. They appeared healthier and stronger than the others who had been eating the king's food. The steward looked again. Then he made a decision. Scripture says he removed the royal food and allowed them to continue their simpler diet. Now, let's pause there for a moment. This is fascinating. Daniel, he did not preach a sermon in the palace. He didn't criticize the other students. He simply lived his conscience. And eventually, those convictions influence someone else's decision. That's the power of a quiet, consistent life. Influence often begins quietly. Many people think influence requires a microphone, a stage, a large audience, but most influence in the world actually begins much more quietly. It begins daily with choices. Just think about it. People notice patterns. They notice reliability. They notice discipline. When someone consistently lives with integrity, others eventually begin to pay attention. Daniel's life became a living example, and examples can be more persuasive than arguments. Let me share a story that illustrates this. There was a teacher that told her pastor about a student in her high school class. The student environment was noisy, chaotic. Students often complain about everything, assignments, schedules, and even each other. But one student stood out. He always showed up prepared. He treated his classmates with kindness. He never joined the gossip that often filled the hallways. At first, people teased him about being too serious. But something interesting began to happen. Other students started sitting near him during group projects. Why? Because he brought calm into the room. His quiet character created a small island of stability in a sea of confusion. By the end of the year, several students said that they admired him, not because he preached to them, but because he lived differently. Daniel's influence in Babylon worked much the same way, what we call the ripple effect of discipline. One of the great lessons of Scripture is that personal discipline creates community blessing. Daniel's decision about food affected more than just his own life. It influenced the steward, it influenced the palace environment, and eventually Daniel's wisdom would influence the entire empire. Small decisions create ripples. You drop a stone into the pond, and the circle spread outward. Our daily habits work the same way. A disciplined life quietly spreads influence. So, why watching our consumption matters? Now, let's connect this with our theme. When you talk about watching our consumption, we're not just talking about diet. We're talking about everything that we take into our lives: media, purchases, entertainment, time, habits. Our culture encourages us to be consumers endlessly. More shows, more purchases, more distractions. But a life constantly consuming without reflection eventually becomes scattered and exhausted. Daniel's story reminds us that restraint can be powerful. When we live with thoughtful limits, we become more present for the people that are around us. Let me give you another more modern example or picture. A man who's working in a busy office noticed at lunchtime conversation often turned negative. People complained about the company. They criticized coworkers. The atmosphere slowly became heavy. So he decided to do something very simple. Instead of joining the negativity, he began asking positive questions. What's something good that happened this week? At first, the people laughed, but gradually the tone of the table began to change. Conversations became lighter. Encouragement replaced criticism. One small choice shifted the whole entire atmosphere. That's influence. And it often begins with quiet discipline. Now, remember, our larger theme is fulfilling our obligations to neighbors. How does watching what we consume help us love others? When we practice self control, we create space for generosity. When we limit distractions, we become more attentive to people. When we avoid excess, we often discover resources that we can share. A disciplined life is not just about personal holiness, it's about becoming a blessing to others. Daniel's example reminds us that our habits shape the environment that we live in: our homes, our workplaces, our churches, communities. Of course, living with discipline sometimes means standing apart from the crowd. Daniel certainly experienced that. Imagine the pressure he must have felt in the palace when he went to eat. Everyone else was joining in the king's food. Everyone else was following the expected pattern. And yet, Daniel quietly chose another path. It takes courage to live differently, but often that difference becomes the very thing that allows God to use us in a powerful way. Let me ask you a thoughtful question. What habits in your life might be influencing the other people around you? Perhaps your patience encourages someone who is struggling. Perhaps your generosity inspires someone else to give. Perhaps your discipline helps create stability in your family or your workplace. You may not always see, the ripple effect, but remember God sees it. And often the people around you will feel it as well. Daniel never set out to change the palace culture. He simply chose faithfulness, one meal at a time, one decision at a time. And slowly, quietly, his life began to influence others. That same possibility exists for each one of us. Our daily choices matter. Our habits matter. Our discipline matters. Because watch what, when we watch what we consume, we become people who bring clarity, peace, strength into the lives of others. And that's one beautiful way we fulfill our obligations to our neighbor, to really love them. Next time we'll conclude this series by bringing everything together and asking three important reflective questions that can help us live wisely in a world of endless appetite. Thank you for viewing today. Pastor Murphy, this is Help Along the Way. We'll see you next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.